A big theme of our series, 80s Horror Memories, is how the outdated method of cable television and the constant reruns of late-night staples gave us a lot of our horror movie knowledge. Today's entry is one of the few that didn't quite get the rebirth that it deserved, but has steadily continued to impress over the years. With the help of physical media, from VHS all the way to 4K, this film has become the epitome of an underrated classic and a monster movie worth revisiting. In the realm of horror, where icons like Pinhead, Freddy Krueger, and Jason Voorhees dominate the landscape, a cult classic exists that oozes its way into the annals of genre conversation. Today, we not only discuss one of the best remakes ever made, but we dig into how it excels with top-tier special effects, an iconic monster, and kills that would become nightmare fuel for a niche generation. Starring Kevin Dillon, Shawnee Smith, and a gelatinous entity from the mind of Chuck Russell, Irvine H, Millgate, and Frank Darabont. I'm of course talking about the Blob. 1988 was an era dominated by the likes of Child's Play and Nightmare on Elm Street 4. Yet, alongside what would be known as some of the greatest slasher movies ever made, the Blob emerged as an interesting deviation. Horror is a genre dominated by trends, and 50s-inspired creature features weren't leading the current culture. But what we got was a wild ride that was way smarter than it had any right to be. Flipping the script on the usual horror tropes, while shaking up the usual expectations we bring to these kinds of flicks. But hey, we'll dive into that a little bit later. Grab the ones you love and pack light, because you must keep moving. There's a big massive pink slime that can go anywhere and it will reach you. Like an aggressively intelligent creature, just like when you think you're in the clear.
Surprise, motherfucker!
No one is safe on this episode of 80s Horror Memories as we try to fight off the Blob.
Everybody complains about the fact that there's so many sequels, and believe me, I'm very well aware of what sequels can or can't be, because I've made good ones and I've made bad ones. And one of the good ones, and one of the ones that we aspire to, it doesn't get the attention that it deserves, is 1988's The Blob.
I vividly recall sleeping over at a buddy's house when I was just 9 years old.
He likes you.
Eating a Tombstone pizza and playing the Genesis version of RoboCop vs. the Terminator. My friend's dad, wanting to influence the newer generation, convinced us to change our plans and watch a movie with him. The film in question was the '58 Steve McQueen starring The Blob. I only bring this up as the relationship with any sort of art is tied to generational exposure, and I left the next day thinking The Blob was one of the worst, dare I say lamest movies my young mind had ever witnessed. Flash forward 3 years later, and I give another look at a VHS cover that always caught my eye. Now, funny enough, as we did a lot back then, I had already taken a mental note and moved on. There were just some covers that looked interesting, but we put them on the back burner, a weird memory of a time long past. But on a chilly fall evening, I finally picked up the box and realized two things. This was a newer version, aka a remake of the one that I had seen, and it was co-written by the man who gave us the masterpiece adaptation of The Shawshank Redemption. Directed by Chuck Russell and written by Russell and Darabont, The Blob is what a creature feature looked like filtered through the high-concept era of the late 80s. Russell's directorial approach to The Blob is not merely a replication of the McQueen original. Instead, he pays homage to its roots, while embracing the sensibilities of the 80s horror landscape. Russell and Darabont wanted to turn everything the original did on its head, aiming for a more cynical and rebellious intervention. The 1958 version had religious ties, with it being produced by the Christian production company Good News Productions, with director Irvin Shortis being a Methodist minister. Those teens were paying for their wild and rebellious actions, aka drinking and doing the unthinkable, trying to get laid. Oh, I can't imagine. Oh boy. The remake took on a more modern approach, and though entertainment is always the most crucial aspect of filmmaking, Russell and Darabont agreed that the subtle message that they wanted to tackle was the issue of the emerging hyper-authority police state in America, very relevant to today. Now, if you're watching this, it's pretty safe to assume that you have either A, seen the Blob, or B, just are not worried about spoilers. Because I won't be doing a beat-for-beat breakdown. Christ, those are just the least interesting videos, and not what we do here on this show. So let's get into the effects, the scenes that make this worthy of discussion, and why many years later, they still hit harder than most. When it comes to a modern creature feature, effects are often as crucial as the narrative itself. Dude, the Blob stands as a testament to the mastery of practical effects. So for this new adaptation, Russell and the crew aimed for a dynamic and visceral vibe. After trying out a bunch of techniques, Tony Gardner and the effects crew settled on what they called prom dresses, which are parachute fabrics sprayed with veins and pumped up with methylcellulose, a thickening agent used in food. One thing that was brilliantly included in the remake was the strength and color change as the monster, I know it's government made, but it's still a monster, as it grows in size. You see, it's acidic by nature and starts off translucent. Then it grows in size and it eats more victims and becomes more acidic and pinker as it ingests more blood. Russell and effects artist Gardner made an intelligent decision to give the monster more defined stages in its development, and in doing so gradually increase the power of the Blob. This made the set pieces bigger, crazier, and more elaborate as the story continued. Something as simple as Paul's surprise death at the doctor's office, to the epic sewer chase. Oh, and real quick, let's give the great Jack Nance a shout out as the Doctor. We're big Lynch fans over here at JoBlo Horror and always want to give some love to his cast when we can. In one of my favorite sequences, which takes place in a packed theater watching what looks to be a pretty damn fun slasher, the creature infiltrates a movie theater, turning what should be a place of entertainment into a horrifying and impressive set piece. Starting with a fun yo-yo jump scare, the Blob engulfs the unsuspecting victims. And as a side note, as someone who has been a frequent moviegoer since I was a young kid, seeing the loud-talking asshole get his comeuppance still brings a smile to my face. I love the look and feel of how they seamlessly integrate live-action shots with practical effects. Though it may look a bit dated, there is something terrifyingly tangible about the look of the Blob coming out of the movie screen. As we've said many times on this series and the channel, practical effects hit different. Miniatures, composites, and the prom dresses are why we still talk about the Blob to this day. As some 80s movies lose a bit of FX charm with high-def transfers, the ingenuity here really makes a big difference. And it's wild to think that Chuck Russell wanted and even tried some CGI before abandoning it altogether.
Now, the original was very sort of like funny and charming and sort of like very specific, but the 1988 remake was brutal and intense and had spectacular practical makeup effects, and it was incredibly clever in how it was constructed. And it has some moments that definitely reflect the cultural impact of the 80s, but at the end of the day, if you want to see a really good remake, one that really delivers on the promise of the premise, 1988's The Blob does it. Frank Darabont was a writer on that as well.
The sewer chase is another sequence that solidifies the film as a monster movie classic and a masterclass in atmospheric tension. I'm all about the dimly lit, narrow passageways that give this that embellished yet practical look. I'm just a sucker for a soundstage, what can I say? The Blob's shape-shifting abilities are on full display as it slithers through the confined space and touches one of the third rails of horror. it actually kills the kid. And to add a cherry on top, we get a jump scare with his melted body screaming for help. The combination of practical effects, puppetry, and stop-motion techniques to bring the Blob to life do so much for the creature feature subgenre. Not to wax nostalgic, but scenes like these bring me back to my youth. Something grand and unique, something that, as you age, you lose. The wonder of movie magic. Watching this on VHS as a kid, the one thing that I noticed outside of the cool special effects was a cast that I connected with. In the role of Brian Flagg, one of the many Stephen King references in the film, is the rebellious hero who takes the lead mantle from Paul, played by Donovan Leitch Jr. Paul is set up as the lead only to be killed off Janet Leigh style via Psycho. Kevin Dillon injects the film with a great deal of charisma, wit, and anti-hero spirit. The dude does a damn good job as the main lead. And Shawnee Smith totally nails it as Meg Penny here, showing off her acting chops in a big way. Meg's not your typical damsel in distress. She's all about being resourceful and tough. Maybe it was my schoolboy crush on her when I first experienced the beautiful VHS quality of the Blob. But Shawnee has always had that cute vibrance that just draws you in. There's a layer of emotional depth that just resonates, making Meg Penny more than just a survivor, but a character worth investing in. When it comes to class acts, you can't ignore Sheriff Herb Geller, played by Jeffrey DeMunn. He's living proof of how a well-crafted character can take the genre flick to new heights. DeMunn brings some heart to the story, turning Sheriff Geller into more than just an authority figure. He's a symbol of humanity in this idyllic small town. Hell, I will forever love DeMunn and his work with Darabont especially, but to this day, I will always catch myself referring to him as Sheriff Herb. The thing that I've come to notice more and more as I've gotten older and more into the writing aspect of the film is how well Russell and Darabont deliver a compelling narrative that transcends the typical horror movie formula. They write characters with real heart, motivations that hit home, and a plot that keeps us hooked beyond the jump scares. The setup and payoff moments make every important and non-thing matter. Flagg practicing his bridge jump, and even Paul and his condom mishap. By spicing up the script with clever execution, suspense, and a character-driven vibe, the Blob is more intelligently executed than many of the horror films of the time. Maybe it's the Shawshank or Dream Warriors in me, but these two seem to see horror as more than just a scare tactic. Russell and Darabont pack layers of meaning into the story, turning the Blob into more than just a brainless monster movie, which I have nothing against and love quite a bit still. But it becomes a decent metaphor, an effects extravaganza, and a sly deconstruction of horror tropes. In essence, Russell and Darabont weren't just out here doing a standard remake or throwing a nod to the past with the Blob. No, they were on a mission, a horror mission to remake a subpar movie into something better. Not to date myself here, but it's like a mixed CD of homage, reinvention, and storytelling swagger. It's Russell's directorial chops and Darabont's way with words that created this real harmonious blend that keeps it alive 36 years later. They were friends prior to writing this, and it shows. Friendships matter, and the sooner you learn this, the better. It's who you know in life. It's not just about how the film looks or the way the story unfolds. It's about creating something that can share a history of what was made before, but uniquely its own. The homage and innovation aren't like oil and water, they're more like whiskey and coke, complementing each other to make a hell of a good time. Their collaboration isn't just a redo, it's a cinematic mixture that vibes with the old school, while grooving to the beat of the new, which is now old, ironically. I wish that this was featured more on late night TV, or got the sci-fi TNT replay some of its contemporaries did. But it's a good sign we're still talking about the Blob this many years later. I wasn't lucky enough to grow up with this as I did Friedkin's Rampage or Raimi's Army of Darkness, but I'll always think of how my hatred of the original and how my video store rental made this 1988 adventure all so special to me. Everything is time and place, whether you want to confront that frightening truth or not. The Blob is the brainchild of the late 80s and stands so to this day. These types of effects-driven flicks can't exist in the current culture like they did back then. We can only pay homage. And you know what? That's alright. Be proud of your history, but accepting of the ever-changing future. Thank you, Russell, and thank you, Darabont. You gave me one hell of a ride.
On the next episode, prepare for the ghost with the most and get your handbook for the recently deceased ready as we dive into Beetlejuice. Until next time, gore hounds.
It's showtime.
Hi friends, your humble narrator Tyler Nichols here, and I hope that you enjoyed that episode of 80s Horror Memories. If you missed our previous episode, click over here. If you want to see more from our series, click up here. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you doing? Subscribe right here. And most importantly, stay spooky, folks.